Well, thanks for giving me your time here. I know you've got to be a busy time with a new book coming out and all.
Oh, it's okay. It's busy as usual.
Yeah, it stays pretty busy, I bet.
Absolutely.
So, what? Tell us about your new book.
Well, the new book is called The Lost Civilization Enigma. It's out on October 22nd, and it's really the successor to the previous book, which is The Ancient Alien Question. And
Which
the
I
fact of
have.
the yay, and the fact of the matter is that the Ancient Alien Question really explores whether or not we're alone. Were we visited in the past or not? And that gives us an overview of our history. But it's also a very specific quest. It's really looking at history and finding almost a proverbial needle in the haystack, which is there evidence of an extraterrestrial contact in our past? And the book answers the question saying yes, there was. But our history is more interesting than just those contacts. It's also thousands of years of material, which really I think the history books haven't really been dealing with all that well. So, for example, what we're presented with is almost as if 4000 BC ancient Sumeria begins, and then we have ancient Egypt, we have Greece, Rome, medieval times, us. And even though there are pockets of information there which suggest that there is something preceding that 4000 BC date, we seem to think it's just pockets. Jericho, Cataluac, more recently Gobekli Tepe, which has been posted at 10,000 BC. And then when you go to France, you're confronted with cave paintings which are 20,000 years old. And if you go into the bailiwick of the likes of Michael Cremer, they will tell you that there is even more material before that, hundreds of thousands, millions of years of material suggesting that mankind is older, but also that civilization is older. What to do with things like Atlantis? What to do with things like Lemuria? And what the Lost Civilization Enigma is really about is delving into all of these subjects. It's basically concluding something which I think is familiar with people who have read the Ancient Alien Question, which is that science, despite the fact that we think it's all about exploring boundaries, boldly going where no man has gone before, um, actually it's absolutely not the case. Science is pretty much all about confirming. It's very much like the classic line from The Name of the Rose, the Umberto Eco movie, whereby he says, that everything we already need to know is known, and that everything which we find out is merely a continuous confirmation of the fact that what we already know is indeed the truth. And that's very much where science is at. Whenever they claim to have made new discoveries, they're really not that new. They're really not that exciting. They basically claim that what they have found is further evidence which backs up what they have already found, and anything which doesn't fall or follow within that framework is really cast aside. It's really pushed and said to be of no worthy whatsoever. And that is sad because it means that an awful lot falls by the wayside. Um, you know, Theoretical case here. We have this framework of a site whereby in the storyline you would say this site is 2000 to 3000 BC years old. Um, if you find a carbon dating result on the site which suggests that somehow the site might be 4000 BC, what they do is they say, oh, well, that carbon dating result must be erroneous because we know that it is 2005 to 3000 BC. If you then find another carbon dating result which suggests that the site might be 7000 BC, again, you say carbon dating result erroneously. A third one, same result. Now, guess what? This isn't a theoretical or a mythical site which I've talked about. It's actually Stonehenge. In Stonehenge, we have carbon dating results of 4000 BC, 3500 BC, and 7500 BC. In all three separate occasions, the scientists have pushed that aside because they know that Stonehenge is 2500 to 3000 BC at its most old date range. And so that's one example out of hundreds of examples across the world. And I think it's time really that we begin to kind of like educate people by saying you may see this headline which suggests that, this thing isn't true, or science basically saying, well, Stonehenge might be older, but we know it's not. Um,
I
as a
might
matter
I,
of fact,
I might add something to that. Educated people, I would say educated slash secular. I think it's important that we start getting more people involved in this that aren't pinned down to religious confining beliefs from the Iron Age.
well, but I think there is something to be said for the fact that an awful lot of people are led down this trail of religion being the same as science. In the book, I actually point that we've lost the sort of notion that somehow 4004 BC was the start of the world, but we keep holding 4000 BC as the start of civilization. And to a large extent, if you take the Bible, the two are the same. And it really is down to science to show that we are far older and far more engineered than we ever were. That this idea of the Bible is truly nothing at all like what real history is all about. But science fails to do this. So as much as we might blame religion, actually science is to blame as well, because science refuses to go beyond this 4000 BC year age.
Yeah, it's not so much religion that I would blame, it's more the process of believing without evidence. We tend to believe things and forget that we started out just pretending like we knew something. And somewhere along the line, the pretending to believe something turns into a knowingness. But there's something about this that you might be able to clarify for me. And it has to do with this. Okay, if we've had civilizations, well developed, high tech civilizations in the past that were fully formed, it becomes apparent that something must happen on this planet that completely wipes out traces of that civilization. Now, what makes us think that that's not going to happen again?
Well, it's first of all, some of these traces of lost civilizations have been self-imposed. We know very little about ancient Egypt. Guess what? Because in just before 400 AD, a Christian mob destroyed everything about the Library of Alexandria. In the early 16th century, Mexico, Inca followed suit because all of these diabolical writings of the natives were burned by the Christians. So we've been doing an awful lot of self-imposed annihilation of our past. And to a large extent, we deny our past as well. In the case of Atlantis, which by all accounts disappeared underneath the sea, we have...
So what makes us think that we're not going... Just let me reform that question then. What makes us think that we're not going to do the same thing that previous civilizations have done? Like, is there something different about this shift? Because let me tell you where I'm coming from. When I look at the world, like yesterday, I had a person here. He's a geoengineering expert, solar expert, and he's laying out some pretty incredibly negative things as far as the methane release and the world environment. I really am starting to get to the point to where I'm shifting over to the side of consciousness and spirituality, because I really am starting to think that without a shift of consciousness, I'm not sure if we're smart enough or evolved enough to pull us through what's ahead of us. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, what's ahead of us is once again removing certain parts of our past. History is written every single day, and each day we rewrite history. And we let people get away with rewriting history on the most basic points of view. We have seen this in the likes of Barack Obama, who riot in saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this. 5 minutes into office, they go back on these changes, and we somehow assume that this is fine. We forget that these things have been said. We leave it to, with all due respect because I absolutely love him, core gestures like Jon Stewart to point out what people have said several years ago or even just a few months ago, and how we have changed history since then. We tend to forget where we come from. And I think that is the reason why we keep hitting the same problems, because we think that we have or that we are facing a situation which is completely new, completely, unique, that we somehow are the summum of everything. And as long as we're going to do that, as long as we think that whatever we're doing on this world or in this planet is, the first time around, then we are going to make bad decisions, whether it is for healthcare, whether it is for politics, whether it is for space, whatever we do, because first of all, we don't see it from the perspective of history. Second of all, we also seem to think that everything is always from an isolationist point of view. One of the other things which I think is severely wrong with this world is that we treat it as if nations still exist. Nations no longer exist. Our phone calls are answered in China or in India. Our furniture comes from China. Our oil comes from halfway across the world. Everything in this world is operating as one global village. Yet somehow we pretend and we let politicians once again get away with this thing that there is this sort of isolationist policy. And this again has a direct influence on history, because we treat it as if all of these civilizations developed independently as well. Whereas the truer perspective of history is that the world has been a global village for an awful long period of time. In 3000 BC, people in Europe were using an awful lot of bronze. Nobody knows where it's coming from. In 3000 BC in America, an awful lot of people were taking up copper, which is one of the vital ingredients for making bronze, and nobody knows where it was used. Well, put those two together, realize that one of the centers of the Bronze Age industry was the Orkney Isles of the top north of Scotland, and that these islands were always used as staging areas for transatlantic contact. And again, you're beginning to see that there might be this transoceanic contact. Things like Thor Heyerdahl, who've proven this as well. And so whenever we are looking at a modern situation, we need to be aware of the fact that probably the situation has occurred in the past somewhere on our planet, and that what we're doing today, which is this one global village, is something which existed 5,000 years ago, but we refuse to look at it from a global perspective. And this is sad, because when it comes to looking at ecological crises, some of which we're facing right now, we're seeing that this has a direct effect. For example, in the Amazon area, one of the last surviving pools of tribal wisdom, because again, science has said that this is somehow some kind of stupid primitive culture of people, and hey, some of them have never even been contacted by the white man. Well, in the book I actually point out that in 1500 AD the Amazon had tremendous cities, tremendous civilizations. And what happened was, a few decades later, after the first wave of European explorers had gone through there, what they actually found was that these civilizations had disappeared, and they jumped to the conclusion that the early explorers had basically made it all up, that none of what the earlier explorers were talking about was just basically BS. What is now known through satellite imagery and on-site research is that these people actually were there, that they prospered, that the traces of their cities can be found, but that it was the white man's illnesses, the bacteria and the viruses, which basically killed hundreds of thousands of people in the Amazon. Now, the interesting thing is that on these territories, things like terra preta have been found, and terra preta is basically a kind of soil which is extremely fertile, which is man-made, man-engineered, and one of the most cleverest things which we have done from an agricultural perspective. Again, because science and history is pretending that all of these people are stupid and are primitive, this kind of technology has barely made any inroads whatsoever in modern agricultural technology. And again, all of these things, our ancestors came up with solutions to problems which we are facing right now. But we as a species, science as an institution, simply refuses to embrace what our history is. And as a result of that, we're confronted with problems which are purely of our own making because we think we're facing them for the first time, whereas actually the solutions have been in place for decades, centuries, in fact, millennia.
And actually, as human beings, we've always been like this, but now with advanced technology, it makes it a little trickier. We can't afford any mistakes.
Well, I think there is. I think one of the things which the last few decades have told us or taught us is that we are sufficiently self-afraid of self-destruction on a global level. Definitely, the Cuban Missile Crisis during the Kennedy era in 1962 showed that there, when it really comes down to the wire, it's almost like human error or crazy stumbling which would push us into self-annihilation. But that is when it comes to purely, contained political actions. When it comes to disasters, whether they are from, an ecological nature or from something else, then it's clear that we are not in control of the ride right now. We are not, looking towards resources like oil or electricity or things like that, food, from a sustainability perspective, from a how are we going to be feeding ourselves 100 years down the line? How are we going to provide ourselves with energy 100 years down the line? What is driving this economy is short-sighted, money-hungry politics, and that is not, of course, the correct way to go. And that could have a disastrous effect down the line, even though for the immediate future, these kind of problems don't really come to total clarity.
Yeah, some of the things that are going on the planet right now, I simply cannot understand. There seems to be a point if you follow any line of research where it drops off and makes no sense whatsoever. And the only thing I can think of is that some people on this planet are so asleep and so embedded in the old regime, and unfortunately they have control of the military too, that it's going to be a matter of a lot of us getting together and stopping supporting that system. So I was just wondering, what do you feel about the? Do you think we're actually being observed by aliens right now, and do you think they're going to return at a key point in our history?
I think again we think we're alone. We think we are somehow, there's this idea about the zoo hypothesis. It's something which an awful lot of people have been talking about. It's great material for science fiction story writing, and basically it's that somehow we are in quarantine or we are surrounded by a big wall, and that nobody is allowed to come in because somehow as a species, as a planet, we are in this exile. Maybe because we haven't reached the correct level of technology or for whatever reason. I do not believe that. I believe, that our history shows us, that our history books show us, that our ancestors tell us that there have always been non-human intelligences out there which contacted and helped our ancient civilizations, but also our modern civilizations, that they are there at our beck and call, and that we can call upon them whenever we so want to do so. I was privileged enough to spend a limited amount of time with Terence McKenna before he disappeared. Jeremy Narby is a dear friend of mine, and it is clear that there are still indigenous wisdom traditions out there in the world which have maintained this contact with these non-human intelligences and are able to, make us aware of the fact that we are not alone, which is precisely what our ancestors were saying as well. I mean, in the ancient alien question, one of the things I hope I have underlined is that um, when we look at this idea that whether or not we have been visited by non-human intelligences, the academics will say that there is no evidence for this whatsoever. Yet our ancestors, whether it's the ancient Egyptians, the Inca, or the Mexicans or whoever, say that this is absolutely not the case. That we've had contact with non-human intelligences throughout history. That we've walked this path of civilization alone, and it's only now that we are, somehow believing, tricking ourselves into believing that we are alone. And this is something which is getting to disastrous proportions, because up until about 1850, pretty much everybody in parts of Scotland believed, for example, in fairies, believed that we were not alone, that we were surrounded by non-human intelligences. Up until 1910, everybody believed and practiced pretty much across the world the belief that we could contact the dead. It was, nothing unusual whatsoever to be part of a seance whereby the dead were contacted. And the likes of Professor Archie Roy and the Eager Dead have done tremendous experiments in writing their book. Have done tremendous efforts in writing their book about the so-called cross correspondences, which is an experiment in which basically people who were absolutely interested in researching whether or not there was something to life after death, that when they died, they were going to make their absolute best to try and communicate with the living. And the end result is the cross correspondences, and Archie Roy in The Eager Dead has gone into that in tremendous detail, and has basically come away with incontrovertible evidence that there is such a thing as life after death. Doctors in operating rooms across the world are reporting anomalous events happening with people who are on the brink of death. Science as a whole refuses to look at it. And so what we have is a world whereby, we should be aware of the fact that there is such a thing as a soul, that there is something which continues after death, where there should be a knowledge of the fact that we're not alone in the universe, that we can communicate with these non-human intelligences on a daily, individual, mundane basis. But again, we believe that we are unique. We believe that we're special. We pretend that there is no evidence for this, and we laugh at people who believe in these kind of things. And the problem is that believing in a soul and believing in life after death, truly at this moment in time, is a matter of belief, because science straightforwardly refuses to look into this. Science is getting away not so much with murder, but with death. Because they refuse to look into these things. And as a result of that, more things are piled onto belief, and the bailiwick of religion becomes ever larger because science refuses to look at these things. And that's a crime. That's a crime against humanity, and it's a crime against basically the entire world, because what happens is that once again, we are confronted with a scenario whereby we think that we know our position in the world and the universe, but that what we constantly walk through, constantly everyday reality for us, is vastly different from the true reality which is out there. And unfortunately, we might come up with gigantic conspiracy theories, whether it is, the Bush administration or Illuminati or whoever, who are in control of these things. The simple fact of the matter is that it are scientists who are able to dictate their own playing field, who are able to dictate their own rules, and the world as a whole. Politicians, men in the street, kids, fathers, children, wives, everyone lets them get away with it. They're the ones who are principally responsible for settling us with a completely twisted worldview. And that is one of the greatest crimes of this time, which is causing so many problems, and also one of the greatest crimes of this time, which I think is unfortunately not identified.
Yeah, everyone lets him get away with it except Terence McKenna.
Unfortunately, Terence departed to the other side
Yeah.
about 12 years ago, so...
Yeah, it was. He opened my eyes. I have a background with curanderos, taking mushrooms, being in South America, taking ayahuasca, and a little while back I took some DMT, and it was an eye-opening adventure, to say the least. And it really dawned on me why it is that the establishment does not want any research happening around hallucinogenics that will take you into an interdimensional reality. Because it could be that we have this whole thing wrong as far as alien intelligences. They could be on a completely different dimension right here, right now, and maybe not particularly just coming from a UFO from the sky.
Well, I think it's an end universe. I think there have been physical contact with non-human intelligences, and I think those are far and few between. But yes, this contact with a non-human intelligence on a daily basis. Terence McKenna, I remember in 1995 in Freiburg at a conference whereby you had the likes of Jacques Vallée and the late Bud Hopkins, um, and he pointed out to them that he had been on those spacecraft and that he knew what those UFOs were, and he was going to tell them what they were, and to a large extent he did, but. Um, I think it's very important that we also understand once again something which has changed between our far ancestors and today. Um, our ancestors across the world left traces of temples, and these temples were not churches; they were places of initiation. And they were places where our ancestors went to, and they had a direct experience of the divine, whether it was through taking DMT, whether it was through some other kind of method. And as a result of that, they had a direct experience. They had a meeting with the ancestors, with the gods, with a non-human intelligence, whatever you want to call it. They came away with knowledge, with an awareness that life was larger than the things we saw on an everyday basis, and that reality was far more complex than anything which we could see with our eyes, could hear with our ears, and the rest of our senses. And that is something which over time disappeared, specifically in the last 2000 years. Riding with Christianity, it's actually Christianity, I think, is the greatest culprit, but they were not the ones principally responsible for it. It began about 150 years before Christianity, when a Roman Empire decided that all the oracles of the dead, all the places where people went in search of making contact with the divine personally, were closed down. And then by the time when it became Christianity, it basically said that, contact with the divine was through a priest. Everything which we knew about the divine was written down in the Gospels. We merely had to consult it, which of course only happened after something of a revolution in the 16th century, when people actually were allowed to actually read the Bible for themselves, because before it was the exclusive bailiwick of the priest to interpret and decide for you as to what had to be understood and appreciated from within the Bible. But the fact of the matter is that two millennia long, we have basically elongated ourselves from experiencing the divine. And it's the likes of you and several other who go in search of faraway places quite often to take these substances and have these experiences, to come away with an understanding that we can experience the divine. Jesus himself actually said, if you want to experience God, close the door to your room and meet him inside. Gnosticism was all about having a direct experience of the divine directly. Again, this is something which history, has changed, and we think once again that the divine is something which is, untouchable for us. That we hold the stories of Bernadette Soubirous, who sees an apparition of something which we've interpreted as the Virgin Mary at Lourdes, as something very, very weird and very unique. But truly, encounters with the divine once used to be pretty much as common as taking a train or boarding a plane. Everybody at one point in their life was going to do that, and the methodology behind it was so carefully and well crafted that it was something of a when I say mass consumption, it's basically they had down the techniques to give everybody who so wanted to have such an experience of the divine. Again, today this is pretty much an alien landscape. We do not understand these things, and again, when we look at the temples of whether it's ancient Egypt or the pyramid complexes of Central America, we don't realize that they are really places of initiation where people in their hundreds, if not thousands, flock to have an experience of the divine, and that it were these ancient governments who were absolutely supportive of giving everybody this direct personal experience of the fact that we were not alone.
I tell you, what goes through my mind is we're definitely in a cycle, and I can see that you're pretty positive about 2012. One of the aspects of being positive is what we're doing right now. The internet is allowing masses of people to spread ideas, and ideas are really strong. They're like a virus if it's a good idea. If it's a good idea and it takes hold, it'll spread. And I can see this happening. I can see it happening. But I also feel like it's a little bit of a race against time, because I could see the old regime scrambling for every little tool that they have to keep control of the population. What would you say to a person that's on the fence going, because let's face it, most people really are confused. I'm one of them, but I see a light at the end of the tunnel. What would you say to most people to stay positive, and what can we do today in our daily life?
Well, first of all, there's an analysis of the Roman Empire, and it basically said that the Roman Empire was, there to be taken over 3 centuries before it actually fell, because for 3 centuries people believed that the Roman Empire was invincible, and then the dream ended, and people realized that it was there for the taking. I come originally from Belgium, where in 1830 there was a play in Brussels, and the play was very stirring up the emotions of the Belgians, who at that moment in time were oppressed by the northern neighbors, the Dutch. And 500 people ran out of a theater. 250 of them began to rebel, and in a few hours, the revolution really was the Belgian Revolution. Belgium was independent, and it took 250 people. A few years ago, at the time of the Iraq invasion, there were 2 million people who took to the streets of London in protests. When 2 million people are on the streets of London, they are the true power of that world, of this country. And it is only their own thought process, to so to speak, which prevents them from taking control of a country. So let there be no doubt about it that the masses will always rule. But the masses need to be in a mindset whereby they are brought to the brink, quite often, of abject poverty or abject horror before they will take that control away. And that doesn't have to be brutal. When 2 million people are on the streets of Washington or New York or Los Angeles, there might not be much shooting when these people take control of these cities, and that is really, I think, something which we need to begin to understand, which is, it's the classic line from V for Vendetta, that great Wachowski movie. People should not be afraid of their governments. The government should be afraid of the people. Unfortunately, we are afraid of the government, and that is through a series of misplaced respect, which is slowly coming to an end. The respect for governments disappeared in Europe a few decades before it disappeared in America. I think the current elections in America really are showing the world that America is waking up to the same reality which the rest of the world has already been in for a number of years, which is that politicians will not be able to change the political landscape. It's like an ant asking to change something about the life of an ant world. Yet you and I with a spade or whatever instrument can change the life of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of ants. And the same is true for politics. Politicians will never change the political landscape, but the political landscape can be changed. And I think what's happening today is a slow realization that something is changing. And before I actually will complete this thought, early on in the question you said the old world is scrambling. Well, I watch American sports, but the greatest sport to actually demonstrate this, which is soccer. And whenever a soccer team is scrambling, it basically means that there are 11 players in front of their own goal, desperately trying to keep the opposition from scoring.
Right.
Guess what? If you do this, if the game is endless and not limited to 90 minutes, a goal will be scored, either through exhaustion of those 90 people in front of that goal or through the brilliance of the 11 players who are attacking it. But, that defense, when it's scrambling, when it's unorganized, when it's basically fighting for survival, it will come to an end. And it's not just in soccer; it's in everyday life that is the case. So that is one thing. But I think what's happening is something which I think I was pointing out before, which is that we are a global village. Technology, the internet has made the world a global village. The economy of the world is a global village. We've seen this in all of its negative aspects in 2008 with the global financial crisis. But the underlying fact of the matter is that China, is prosperous because it is basically taking over some of our production systems. And at the same time, the West is in a problem zone because we don't really know what to do with that as an end result. But again, politicians in this regard are telling us certain things which I think are wrong, and in some cases I think dishonest, depending on whether the politician is intelligent or not. The absolute focus on borders, on frontiers, is something which no longer exists. Yet, to say something along the lines of we need to defend our borders from immigration or the foreigners this or the foreigners that, it doesn't work. The economy, first of all, has nothing to do with the foreigners. The economy are all multinationals. It's in the word itself. They are multinational. They can pick and choose to which country to go. For them, borders do not exist. The way politicians play with things like taxes don't apply to these multinationals either. It are, at best, efforts of decent men who are trying to pretend that they're in control of things. In a large percentage of other cases, I think it's complete dishonesty, whereby they're pretending to be somebody to the people, which is absolutely not the case. But what I see is truly that all of us are becoming citizens of the world, or not already have become so, and then there are other people who are not so much there yet, and then politicians who are definitely trying to pretend that there is such a thing still as borders, whereas in reality that's not the case. And I think the quicker we let go of this idea that there is still division amongst us, the quicker the world will actually become a better place. It'll let go of tremendous amounts of stupidity. It will be a clear signal, I think, that we are able and willing and open to see that we as mankind truly are far more alike than what separates us. I mean, I travel an awful lot. I see how people across the world are identical, but when we are confronted with some of the ideology which isn't theirs, but which they hear through newspapers or television or whatever, that's where the division comes in. That's where actually the stupidity comes in as well, where the crazy thinking happens. It's not native to mankind to think poorly of our neighbors, but it is easy to get crazy thoughts into people when people are somehow deprived of true information, either through correct information which is given to them through the media, or through direct experience of these different civilizations on our planet.
Well, that sounds like an idea worth spreading.
Please help me.
I'm going to do my best. So, I'll probably cut the interview here and just let you know that it's really been a pleasure talking with you, Philip. My wife and I watch you all the time. We've watched YouTubes and Ancient Aliens, and it's for us, it's really important what people like you are doing, because if we don't do this, if we don't get out and speak and get beyond our comfort zones, and especially if you can do it with an academic background where you can get the other side to listen a little bit, it's really been nice seeing your journey and watching what's going on.
Well, I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure being here, and as you say, it these kind of things require all of us
Yep.
to keep hammering on the path. So thank you for having the show and working and clearly reading a lot as well, looking from your background.
Yeah, it's so. If you email me a mailing address, I'll mail you a few copies of the issue when it comes out.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I will send you my mailing address straight away.
All right. You take care, Philip.